Good afternoon, everybody. This is Minerva Santiago with Legally Remote, your estate planning and elder law attorney located in High Springs, Florida. We're here for our second episode of our three-part series where we're talking about quality aging and how to create a plan for that. Last week, we really just spent some time talking about what quality aging is, how we define that. And here with us today is Star Bradbury, who's an aging life care specialist.
Yes.
And she has a book that she has that she wrote and she published last year.
Yes. Okay. In fact, about a year ago.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
This month.
And it's called Successfully Navigating Your Parents' Senior Years. And this is not geared only to adult children planning for their parents. It's actually geared for anybody that is planning for a senior. So today we're going to focus on how to develop a plan.
Mm-hmm.
And really what we want to focus on is starting that conversation, because it's so challenging to balance out where you want to allow your parent or the senior to be as independent as possible.
Mm-hmm.
You don't want to offend them in any way, but yet these are really important topics that we need to address with them. So in your book, I think you did a great job at bringing out suggestions at how we can address those conversations.
And start this conversation.
Yes.
Yes.
So if you don't mind, I'd love for you to cover that a little bit.
Oh, I'd be happy to. I felt it was really important to address this because from my own experience, I made so many mistakes in starting the wrong conversation or starting with the wrong topic, or and then sort of got nervous about bringing the topic up again and procrastinated and didn't really sit down with my parents when I could have and ask them what their wishes were and had some semblance of a plan.
Mm-hmm.
That's partly why I'm so committed personally to helping people avoid some of those mistakes and pitfalls I made. But it is important to start the conversation, and we were just talking before we started with all of you about when should we do that? And we talked about this a little last time, but we kept moving the age earlier and earlier.
Yeah.
Meaning, I think we both agreed that really, if you could wave a magic wand, you would start the conversation with your parents, perhaps before they retired, maybe even as early as, we said 50,
Mm-hmm.
Because there's so much that goes into planning.
Yeah, absolutely.
And
Yeah.
for long-term care and for paying for long-term care,
Mm-hmm.
and having some of these legal and medical documents
Yeah.
in place, that's the important part.
Yeah. So I'll talk a little bit about long-term care, I guess, after you finish covering with regards to how individuals should start this conversation, how to kind of gently,
Right.
you need to address finances. You need to address the reality of, at some point, mom, dad, you're not going to be,
Right.
you're not going to be able to do this on your own.
But don't start with that.
Exactly.
Don't start with that. Start with, my suggestion is very gentle questions, something like, so mom and dad, when you're thinking about retiring, or as you're coming up on your retirement, have you thought about what you want to do? Are you going to stay here in your home? Are you thinking about moving to Florida? Are you, what kind of lifestyle do you want? And so those are very soft, gentle questions. Are you thinking about moving? And if so, where? And if that could be relocating, do you need any help in kind of investigating where you might move? There's a lot of things to look at.
Yeah.
In terms of, if you're going to move, is it an AARP livable city? Is it have good health care? Is it have all the things you love to do? If your dad loves to golf, or does it have the arts? So I would say start with super gentle questions, and establish regular communication about this, so that everyone gets more comfortable, Minerva, about having these conversations.
Yeah. And I think a good point you brought out last week was where you suggested that the child make it about themselves.
Yes.
And not about the parent.
Yes.
So.
Yes. At some point, if you say, your parents might say, well, why are you asking and I would say, because I've watched some of my friends struggle
Mhm.
with being thrown into a crisis with their own family and parents, and I want to know what your wishes are. I don't want to be guessing. And so let's just start talking now, ahead of any crisis at all, about what you're thinking of and what you want in your life and
Right.
lifestyle.
And typically, I mean, isn't the typical response where they don't want to move? They have no intentions of moving.
Yes, well, that's true. You know, something like 95% of all people say they want age in place, which just means staying in your home.
I can relate to that.
Yes,
I want that.
yes. And you know what? That's not a bad plan, but everyone thinks, oh, it'll just happen automatically.
Exactly.
Right. You know, I don't need to do anything. I can just, you know what I always say? Well, that is a statement.
Yeah.
I want age in place, but that's not a plan.
That is true.
Yeah.
That is true.
So it's possible to age in
Yes.
place successfully,
Yes.
but it does take some concentrated thinking and planning.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
Have you found, I don't know how effective this strategy is,
Mhm.
but have you found that maybe when the children do their own planning
Mm-hmm.
and start talking about because they're not saying, hey, mom, dad, this is important, you should have this conversation, but yet they haven't done like maybe their own planning, not for long-term care, but just in general, I
Mhm.
guess.
Mm-hmm.
Is it helpful if the kids kind of start doing their
Yes.
own planning, and that way they could bring mom and dad into the
Absolutely.
conversation?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Because you're never too young to have a living will,
Mhm.
or even a will. So many people, there's so many myths and um, uh, thinking that I don't think is clear, let's say, about when do I need a living will, or when should I even have a will or a trust.
Yeah.
And so you can start by saying, hey, you know what? I just realized I read an article and I've decided I'm doing a living will. Mom, Dad, have you done a living will? And here's who I'm going to choose as my healthcare surrogate. Do you want any help in doing a living will since I'm doing mine?
Yeah.
Or have you done a will? Because my partner and I have decided, my husband, my wife and I, we're going to go see an attorney and sit down and make a plan.
Yeah.
Have you done that? So that is a good lead-in. It's an excellent lead-in.
Okay, good. And how about, do you have any specific pointers with regards to families who are really tight-lipped about finances? Like, how does an adult child help in that circumstance?
Well, I ran into that with my own father, where my sister and I sat down and thought that we'd have an easy conversation. And this was we got home and this is when people used to write letters and actually send them in the mail. We got a poison pen letter. That was none of our business, and why were we asking all these financial questions? And that kind of taught me that I really approached it far too directly and made a lot of assumptions about their level of interest in sharing that information with us.
Yeah.
So now what I tell families is it's far better to say, Mom, Dad, I would like to sit down and talk with you about your plan for post-retirement, or if anything should happen, or what you've planned financially. And here's where it's the critical part.
Yeah.
I'm not asking to see your will. I'm not asking about details about your financial situation, other than the information I would need in an extreme emergency. Is there a will? I don't need to see it. And if there is, and something happened to both of you in some sort of horrible accident, who would I even call?
Yeah.
Could I have the name of your attorney? And does he have a copy of the will? I personally, my stepfather, who I loved and who I moved to closer to me after my mom died, also, that was the curveball. Didn't see that one coming. He said, don't worry, I have a will. Well, it's too long a story, but I didn't push it. I didn't say, well, where? I didn't verify that. And as it turns out, he did not. So I learned a pretty tough lesson from that. And so I would advise anybody out there is, if you have a will, again, tell your children, your adult children, who are hopefully you trust and you're, where the will is and who has the will, and you verify that. But you don't have to share any more than you want to,
Right.
and that goes both ways.
Right. That's true. So you had brought out that with regards to having the conversation, obviously sooner rather than later is ideal.
Ideal.
And I guess similarly, when I meet with my clients and we're doing our estate planning, I often bring up the topic of long-term care because I find that it's not thought of often. Everybody's very focused on retirement, but not on long-term care.
Right.
And I think there's this misconception that my parents are older, they'll have Medicare, and that will cover whatever they need. Well,
big misconception.
Big misconception, as we know, Medicare covers minimal for any long-term care. And unless you have long-term care insurance, then really you're going to have to be paying out of pocket.
Well, sadly, I have found that also to be true. There are a lot of misconceptions where people say, well, I don't think my parents need to worry about long-term care, or even an older person who doesn't understand what Medicare does or doesn't pay for. Now, most of the people that I talk to have a supplemental insurance as well, and I will often say, do you have a long-term care insurance plan? And they go, yes, I have a supplemental plan. And I will like, no. A supplement is a supplement to Medicare only, does not cover long-term care. And Medicare is very, very limited. Like you said, I think it's 100% for the first 20 days, and then it's, but at some point they're out of the picture.
Yes.
And if you are getting home care, home health care, assisted living, skilled nursing, most of that is going to be out of your pocket and private pay, unless you have some specific long-term care insurance policy that could cover most of those things.
And long-term care insurance is not only for seniors. I was just telling Star that I attended a luncheon today and heard someone speaking about long-term care products and brought to our attention that what they were paying the most claims out for was arthritis. I don't remember if they said it specifically rheumatoid arthritis, but that could happen at any age because arthritis you become so debilitated physically. There's so many activities of daily life that it then impacts. So when we talk about long-term care, we're not talking about where you have to be 80 before you need it.
Besides, that's way too late. Yeah. Way too late to think about how you might be paying for that care. That's why I know it may come as a shock that we're talking about thinking when, as an adult, you might think about long-term care and paying for long-term care. But honestly, the rates for long-term care insurance skyrocket starting with 60 and up. Plus, there is a very strict health assessment requirement to be offered a long-term care insurance policy. And believe me, we've probably both seen people disqualified. Sorry, we're not offering you a plan because you have what I would consider some fairly basic things. Maybe you're diabetic, maybe you've had some joint replacement, maybe you've had a few issues. Well, they look at everything and they go, you're too high a risk, we're not going to cover you. So the time, as we were talking, is before those health issues might show up for you, before the rates skyrocket. And I had a tough life lesson when I ran an assisted living facility, and I saw people living there long term in their 40s and 50s from a debilitating chronic illness or an accident. And so it's not, what we're basically saying is, don't make assumptions about, oh, I won't need this until much later, because you really have to plan ahead.
And I'd like to clarify that when we talk about long-term care insurance, that doesn't necessarily mean that your intention is to be in a facility or a nursing home.
Right.
You can still, most people say they want to be home and they expect their family to take care of them. This doesn't replace that, but it's very helpful to your family because
I'm so glad you said that, because most people probably are thinking that means you have to go to facility or skilled care. But every long-term care insurance policy that I have read that's being written now covers home care.
Yeah.
And it even will allow you, some of the really good policies, to pay a family member to provide that care for you at home and train them. So that's a kind of a little check that you might consider when you're looking at policies. Do they have that? If you happen to have anyone in your family that would be willing and able to fulfill that caregiving role.
Yeah.
And before we leave this, I do want to say there's other long-term care insurance policies on the market now that have been developed over the last few years that are not just your standard plan.
Right.
They're called hybrids. And you saw somebody present about that today.
I did. It
So
was a very
tell
good.
us a little.
So the advantage of the hybrid policies is where it's not a use it or lose it kind of policy, which
Right.
a lot of people don't like with long-term care
Right.
insurance policies. What the hybrid policies offer, it's a hybrid because it offers life insurance,
Right.
long-term care insurance, and it has liquidity as well.
Right.
So if you don't use the long-term care portion, there's still going to be a death benefit. If you need to pull money out for some reason, you could take a loan against it, or if you just want to take withdrawal, you can do that as well. But it's a lot more flexible.
Correct. And also, it's a lot kinder on their health assessment. They're not as strict. So if you are disqualifying yourself, I already have this, they'll never, don't think that. There are different kinds of policies out there now that are offered even if you're older and even if you have some health issues. So talk to an insurance expert, which I am not.
I'm not either.
But we do know these policies are out there, and we want you to understand that there could be one that's right for you in terms of looking ahead and paying for long-term care.
Definitely look into long-term care options. We encourage you to do so earlier rather than later. The reality is that we're living longer, and therefore we're prone to chronic issues. We're going to face things that we're going to need help with. So,
well, it's kind of funny. I like to joke. Well, you might not have any problems if you die super young, but well, let's face it. If the demographic of the fastest growing age group is 90 to 100, it's very likely that many of you listening will age into that older group. And even though none of us want to even think about needing care, it's smarter to anticipate that you might, and at least have a plan in place that's going to help you and your family manage that before there's a crisis, before you're getting a call that the discharge planner is saying one of your loved ones can't go home.
Yeah. So if you don't mind, because you have the healthcare background, we're talking about long-term care insurance. We both agree it's important, but you have more knowledge about the facilities as far as the different types of facilities and what the cost of being at one of these facilities is like. So can you talk about
I'd be happy to. And I want to just say that there's a website that I mentioned so many times in the book because it's so important. If you would like to look at long-term care costs, meaning home care, home health care, assisted living, skilled nursing, you can go to the Genworth Cost of Care Survey. If you just put that in your browser, Genworth, it's a big insurance company, Genworth, Genworth, and put Cost of Care Survey. And this is a big survey they do every few years, and lots of people within the long-term care industry look at that because you can put in your zip code, and if you're thinking about moving to another area, you can put in that zip code and pull up the rates. You would be shocked at the difference from state to state. But let's talk about Gainesville, since that's the most relevant. So if you were needing care in your home and you were hiring what's called a home health aide or home companion, you can expect, if you're going through an agency, to pay about $25 an hour. And those agencies will have a minimum, meaning a minimum number of hours per week and days per week. They won't just drop by for 2 hours once a week or even twice a week. They need to know that you are going to be able to provide one of their employees a full-time position, basically. And assisted living, there's a pretty big range But I would say in Gainesville, assisted living, and we're going to talk more next week about what is assisted living and how is that different and what is memory care. But assisted living in Gainesville is going to run anywhere from, I hate to say this, but 7,000 to 8,000 a month, and that's it depends on the assisted living facility can either have one monthly fee that's all inclusive of everything you need, but most don't. They have like a base rate that's the minimum fee, and then after they assess the person and what kind of help they need with what's called ADLs, activities of daily living, then they tier up. They'll say this person is a level 1, so it's another 1,200. A level 2, they need even more help, another 1,000.
Right.
And so when you add it all up, and it's important to ask what's the total, including the levels,
Right.
that's going to be 7,000 to 8,000.
Yep.
Give or take.
And
Give or
that
take
rate,
some.
is that for private room or shared room?
That's for, assisted living, that's for typically a private small apartment.
Okay.
So the nice thing about assisted living is that it's for people who need support to maintain their independence for the most part. Meaning they don't need skilled nursing. They're not so ill that they need to be in skilled nursing. And in assisted living, you bring your own furniture, you can bring some of your special things with you.
Right.
And you can actually have a fairly nice little apartment with what I call a mini kitchen.
Yeah.
I would encourage you to go visit the assisted living facilities in Gainesville before you might need them if you think that's in your future.
Yeah.
And then skilled.
And we talked about that some assisted living facilities may have a shared bathroom.
Yes, some assisted living facilities, especially if you're looking to keep that cost down, could have a shared bathroom and dual, like a Jack and Jill room.
Yeah.
Okay, so what I was quoting was the price
Right.
for that included at that higher range, typically memory care, which means in addition to help with activities of daily living, you have some cognitive impairment. And so that level is even higher. The higher the need for assistance, the higher the cost in assisted. For skilled nursing, I called recently to a community here in Gainesville, and a private room in skilled nursing was over $14,000 a month. And so while there are facilities that are less than that in the Gainesville area, I think it would be safe to tell you that if you needed skilled nursing, it would be 10 to 14,000 a month.
Can you clarify when somebody needs the skilled nursing as opposed to the long-term care?
That's a great question. In order to be accepted into any assisted living facility, your doctor is going to fill out a very extensive form, and a representative from the assisted living facility will do an in-person assessment, and that's only fair. How can they decide if they're going to both meet your needs as a possible resident there,
right,
and stay within the federal guidelines for who an assisted living facility can accept or reject? So they're required to do that. It's a process. And they're going to be looking for people who maybe need assistance with bathing, dressing. The big one is medication management, helping somebody stay on a regimen of medications. Of course, they provide 3 meals a day. They provide a great deal of support and assistance. But nothing that I've mentioned would fall into the skilled nursing.
right,
And skilled nursing would mean that you really have a chronic condition or a health condition that requires true medical care and medical observation. Maybe there's some mobility or safety issues getting in and out of bed, but you have fallen into a higher level of care that excludes assisted living.
Yeah.
There's a set criteria for all these facilities. They don't just randomly make this criteria up. It's through the Agency for Healthcare Administration, which is the oversight, ACA, that governs and oversees and surveys assisted living facilities, skilled nursing facilities.
So you used to run an assisted living facility?
Yes, in memory care.
So as far as having residents there, do you have any stories as far as what you should avoid as far as?
Well, you know, I guess that's funny because the first thing that came to mind, because I used to do the admission part of the admission assessment to come into the assisted living facility I ran. And I often would go into someone's home, Minerva, and I would see someone who is isolated, lonely. Maybe they weren't driving anymore. They didn't have a good support system, meaning they didn't have family. They weren't socializing. And even though they might have been really somewhat afraid about leaving their home and moving into assisted living, it had gotten to the point where the level of their need was enough that they were motivated, or their family felt it was the only option. The good news is that I actually saw improvement. I actually saw people kind of come back to life. Why?
Yeah.
They had peers to talk to from their generation. They went to a dining room and ate with other people. They had activities that were fun and stimulating. They even went on field trips. So I kind of have a different opinion. I have seen where moving into a community has rejuvenated someone.
Yeah, that's true.
So I would say stay flexible. One thing I'll say is never say never.
Yeah.
Don't say I'll never do this, I'll never do that, because I've seen more people come back to life than feel depressed and
I actually have a client in mind, and that's exactly what happened to her. And they were thinking she had maybe a few months to live, and she's still going, and she's having a great time.
That's a wonderful story. I love hearing that. Yeah.
That is.
And it is important to ask the right questions when you go and visit these facilities. I have a long list of questions in my book, and also I just put those questions up on my website for free. Just go to my website. It's just look Star Bradbury, and on the website I have a resources tab, questions to ask.
Okay.
So, you have got to talk about Medicaid.
Well, the Medicaid, I think we just briefly talked about it with regards to, if a lot of people think that if you don't, that Medicare is going to cover, and then if you don't have a plan in place, then a lot of times what people are going to resort to is Medicaid. And we'll talk about, I consider that resorting to Medicaid is when you don't have a plan, really. So
True.
I think for that, we'll leave that one for the next episode.
Okay.
But
There's so many myths about Medicaid.
There is. What I've been surprised by is, I guess, the lack of information patients and families receive when they have a diagnosis, a family member has a diagnosis of dementia, where families aren't getting documentation like the power of attorney, the advance directives, those critical legal documents. They're not putting them in place because they're not getting the information. And what ends up happening is the planning part, like when you have to put a plan into action at that point, and by the time they come to me and they don't have anything in place, a lot of times by that time the capacity is gone and they can't appoint somebody, the planning becomes so much more complex. And what I'd like to urge families to do is, obviously within this conversation of the long-term care, is have the conversation about, we talked about the child getting their planning done, but absolutely address those necessary documents like the power of attorney.
That's at the top of my list. I mean, I don't separate out the importance of, because the will is where you're going to, or trust, appoint a power of attorney, someone who can make decisions for you if you're no longer able to make decisions. That's absolutely critical.
Well, there's the power of attorney document is the person who's going to make decisions for you with regards to finances, contracts. But what's very critical is you don't want to get just a power of attorney that you download off of the internet.
No.
And not even all estate planning attorneys will create a power of attorney that delineates specifically. There needs to be specific language in powers of attorney for you to do some of the Medicaid planning strategies.
Oh, true.
That unless that's in there, then you may have a big problem if you need it.
Right.
So
and none of us can predict
if
dementia is in our future.
Right.
And that goes back to how important we feel it is to get some of these critical medical and legal documents in place long ahead of the need. You know, when I sit down with clients who are in their 80s and they don't have a will or a trust, they don't have any of these documents, I kind of want to say, what are you waiting for?
Yeah.
The time to do this is long before there's a crisis, long before there's a hint of dementia, because as we've both seen, when you procrastinate or wait, then now you're making critical decisions from a place of fewer options.
Yeah. Well, there's several legal documents, but the I guess what I'd say the staple ones that are highly recommended is the healthcare surrogate, the living will, and the durable power of attorney. And then the rest of the plan is really customized. There's not a one size fits all for every family.
True.
So we're gonna wrap up for today, but for our next episode, our last episode, we'd like you, if you don't mind, to touch upon the differences between the facilities. We know there's different types of facilities. What is the actual difference between all of them, and what questions people should be asking?
Oh, I'd be happy to do that.
Good. And I'll be covering, you know, in situations where somebody does need that long-term care, what do you do if you don't have a plan, but you need the care?
Right.
So thank you all for joining us, and we look forward
you.
to seeing you next week, same time.